Good morning. Welcome to the Zen Club podcast. It snowed here yesterday. April 21st. And here in Pittsburgh, we got, a quarter of an inch of snow, which is unusual but not absurd. In fact, the first year that I moved to Pittsburgh, which was 30 years ago, now that I think about it, almost 30 years ago, it was in 1992. No, I moved in 1991. I moved in September of 91, and then in April of 92, we had a blizzard, and there were feet of snow, or at least a foot. It was a major snow event. 30 years ago, we did get more snow. We always had snow by Halloween, by the end of October, and not uncommon to have snow in early April. It was unusual to have a foot of snow. So we had snow. Pennsylvania in the western part. Pittsburgh is in the western part of Pennsylvania, which in turn is in the eastern part of the United States. So today, now that we are grounded in geography and meteorology, I thought I would talk more about that idea of space that we were talking about in the last podcast. Right, I had this image of a book that I'm absorbed in as I sit in my chair reading, and then become aware of the room. The doors to the room open up, I become aware of the field. So I was trying to get across the relationship of the book, which is sort of the active, cognizing, intellectual part of my brain, my ordinary mind, and then the larger space. And I don't know if I said this in the last time, but the size of the book hasn't changed. I'm sure I said something similar to this, but what I really am struck by, what I'm thinking through now, is that the thinking part of the mind isn't going anywhere. It's just in relation to the context of the space that becomes more aware, and as it becomes more aware, becomes larger. The relationship or the proportion of the book to the space gets smaller. And it stands for the question that comes up, like, in meditation, should my thoughts cease? And of course, there's no should. That's a word that we try to avoid. But a realization or a phenomena that may occur is this sense of the mentation, the thinking, simply being a smaller part of a newer awareness, a larger awareness. I like the idea of the book because it doesn't judge the book. A book can be beautiful, and a book can certainly be filled with astonishing and useful information. But the book can also be set aside next to the chair, and attention can be paid to the room. Attention can then be paid to the windows and the door. Just similar to another image that I've talked about before that I really continue to find enormously beautiful and resonant. And that's to think of a mountain. And when I say a mountain, there's two images that come to mind for me. One is kind of the iconic image of Everest. And there's pictures that show the summit of Everest taken from a distance, maybe from base camp or from even further away. And the pictures often are there to demonstrate the weather at the top of the mountain, at the summit, where the wind is uniquely strong, and you can see the patterns of the wind because they're blowing the snow off the top of the mountain. So you have these curly cues of wind visible because they're carrying the particles of snow. And you can see that it's very different from the wind patterns on the rest of the mountain, because it's the top, and as we know, it is the topmost part. You get the sense of Everest peeking into the highest level of the stratosphere, where there is this constant circulation of atmosphere that's totally different from our experience of atmosphere down here. So the image of a mountain like that, a photograph of Everest with the wind blowing at the top of the mountain, the summit. I keep saying the top of the mountain, and then remembering that there's a perfectly good word for that, the summit. So that's one image of a mountain. The second image is more sort of traditional Chinese calligraphy style, where the mountain is drawn with a few broad brushstrokes on a piece of paper, and those brushstrokes sort of capture the shape of the mountain, and then often in those calligraphic representations of the mountain, you'll see birds flying around the top, which in the case of Everest is unlikely that there'll be birds flying around the summit. But in the visual, these birds are flying around, and the mountain in both cases, but the image then is of the seated meditation posture is the mountain, and then the wind and the birds are representation of the thought activity that continues unabated around the structure of the mountain. But the seated pose is stable and firm, focused, and relative to the birds and the wind, it is immovable. Now, nothing is immovable. Even Everest is movable. I think I saw somewhere that Everest is getting smaller. Of course it would. It's going to erode. There may be something to do with melting ice that's also making it a little bit smaller, or more smaller faster. I think we're talking inches a year. But that's got to count, right? Over the course of a couple of decades, you've lost a couple of feet, and at some point that's going to impact. Except I guess maybe the other mountains are also losing height at the same rate, or a similar rate. So the mountain is the seated pose. It is the energetic structure of the internal channels, or the chakras, or however you want to visualize that. In the practice that I study, we have this image of three channels, two on the side and one up the center. And this is sort of the foundational energetic structure of the body, particularly in a seated pose. And then the thoughts are like birds that circle around. They are there, they are beautiful, they are meaningful, But in the context of the mountain, they are fleeting and ephemeral. The bird flies in, toodles around, flutters around, and then flies back to its nest or goes on to the other mountain. The wind blows on the mountain. The wind may shape some superficial nature of the mountain, move some snow off the top, may rustle some of the trees, depending on how far up the wind is blowing. But the granite heart of the mountain is unmoved by the wind. Again, that word unmoved is in turn context. In the context of the wind and in the context of me as a seated meditator looking at the mountain, that mountain is unmoved. In the context of geological time, that mountain is going to be worn down to a nub. Here in Pittsburgh, where it snowed, we are in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. And they're not really very tall. I think the tallest in the Allegheny Range is maybe 2,000 feet above sea level. To put some context, I think Pittsburgh itself is at 1,100 feet above sea level. So it's not like we're surrounded by mountainous spires. These aren't the Rockies or the Alps. But my understanding is that if we would go back a sufficient number of millions of years ago, the Appalachian Mountains would have been as high as the Himalayas. And over time, they have eroded. Pittsburgh was just south of the southernmost glacier. And when I say just south, I mean literally like 30 miles, which is pretty remarkable. But all of that sense of geological time, of course, the mountain does move, the mountain does change. Because with a broad enough context, everything is movable, everything is impermanent. All right, if you have any questions, drop me a note, zenglop@gmail.com. Put a comment in either the podcast or the YouTube channel, subscribe, do all that stuff. And I'll talk to you again soon. Keep your wits about you.